Welcome to Youniversal Theory, where the goal is to find a common language between the abstract and concrete. We are the unorthodox representation of physics and metaphysics. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Trent.
And together, we are Youniversal Theory.
What's up, everybody? Today on Youniversal Theory, we have a special guest. He had a divine intervention, a divine experience about 5 years ago. Since then, he's been studying with the Theosophical Society, or currently he's studying with the Theosophical Society and the Kabbalistic Center in Toronto. He also builds with his community, Wisdom Eternal, and his name is Vitaly. How's it going, man?
Yes, sir, brother. Yes, sir. Vitaly.
Vitaly.
Vitaly, you got it.
Okay. I said I was drawing out the I there. Let's see how this guy's doing over here, though, too. Jordan, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
You're doing good?
Mm-hmm.
You sure?
Oh, yeah.
You positive?
He's always good.
Mm-hmm.
He's always good? Yeah, he is, man. It's kind of creepy how this dude is always good. It's kind of like, I'll be upset. I'll be in my feelings about something. He'll just be all calm. Yeah. Do. And he does something. And I'll be like kind of mad how calm he does it. Like, man, I got mad and I was in my feelings. You're supposed to get in your feelings too. And he just is calm, and then it makes me feel bad. And that's kind of the dynamic sometimes. But I'm an emotional person. Hey, anyways.
Power of silence.
What's that?
That's the power of silence.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah, and speaking of the power of silence, no, just kidding. We want you to talk. You're our guest. We want you to talk as much as possible. Actually, I want you to do an introduction of yourself, if you wouldn't mind.
An introduction of myself?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Vitaly. I run a community called the Wisdom Eternal. I have been studying everything under the sun for the past, well, clearly my whole life, but particularly the last 5 years, following a divine experience, which led me to search out and try to understand everything that has been happening to me since that point in time. I was a person that but I would have laughed at you when you tried to bring up these kind of topics of discussion. I was on a very different path in life. And after a series of events and a continued series of events, it's not like it happened and it stopped. It has been a continuous unfoldment. And from a certain point, things began happening, and I had no other choice but to seek out and try to find the answers as to what has happened. So that's, in a nutshell, me, and a little bit about my story, what brought me to the wisdom itself, and the science of it.
Were you a weird kid? Tell me a little bit about that.
Was I a weird kid?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess. I don't know. I think all kids are kind of weird in their own way. But yeah, I wouldn't have said that before, but I clearly had things that happened to me as a kid, and I could never put them into perspective. Only once I had this, which some people would call an awakening or a divine experience, or however you want to word it. But was I a weird kid? I mean, probably, I guess, in the sense that all kids are kind of weird. But again, to put in perspective things that happened as a kid, I could only do that after things began unfolding around 29, 30 years old for me.
So you did have experiences as a kid?
I did, but I didn't understand. I thought, okay, maybe all kids have certain things. It's like, how do you relate to somebody, a conscious experience of things? Clearly it happens to you, like, oh, this must be happening to everybody.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. 100%. That's probably the exact same thing that happened to me as a kid. I thought, other kids were going through it. And then kind of when I found out that that wasn't the case, is when I stopped talking about it. And I just kind of dealt with it and was like, I'm not normal. I'm not normal. Help me be normal. God, make me normal. Yeah. So, well, you know, thanks for the introduction. We might as well just get straight into it. I do have one more question for you. Is if there was one thing that you could tell a kid or someone who might have experienced some of the things you've experienced, or it doesn't have to be a kid, right? It could be a teenager who's maybe battling depression or just doesn't feel like they fit in. You know, what would you say to that individual?
I would say that the world is much stranger than you think it is. I would say that the truth is far stranger than fiction, truly. And the reality of everything that surrounds us is by far more interesting than any movie or book or anything that you can come up with. The reality of this, the reality of it is far much stranger, and to pay attention and really, if you have the interest and if you have the desire to, and you start asking questions that are a little bit on the deeper end of things, is to truly follow through with them and allow that spark of curiosity to guide you, because again, the truth is stranger than fiction, for sure.
Yeah. Jordan, what do you think about that?
I would agree. It's nice to be in a day and an age where we have things like movies. You know, like people always talk about Hollywood and, you know, how damaging it can be to the subconscious mind for programming purposes and political agendas and things of that nature. But we also have stuff like the Avengers, you know, and multiversal concepts and stuff like that. So it's like, you know, those are things that some people would just dismiss as fictional, but it's a lot closer to reality.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's a great point. That's something that you also said was pay attention. I think that's one of the things as a teenager, when you have all those hormonal changes, and even as a kid, you're kind of just still trying to understand the world around you. There's so much going on. Everything is novel. It's hard to really know what to pay attention to. But I think that was a great point. I think that was something that I started to do as a kid. And the more that I started to pay attention, the more that the experiences scared me less. I still felt awkward. I still felt like I wish that there was someone else that I could talk to about this. And I did have, actually, I was lucky. I had a friend when I was a kid who was a Buddhist. R. Diddy, if you're watching this, man, what's up? And we would kind of go back and forth through our teens, and we both had different experiences that we could talk about. So understanding it and starting to pay attention to the details really helped me as a kid. And yeah, I think the idea of truth being stranger than fiction is a great point. And I learned about a lot of that even in physics, right? That never goes away. The fact that actually it gets stranger, I think, is kind of what you were saying, right? The more you know, the stranger things get, and the more kind of weird patterns start to emerge, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And the problem is with kids, and I mean, society in general, is you are raised and given an idea of what reality is from the day that you're born. You are told, and you are conditioned in a certain way, and as well with movies, of course, and media, not so much. I mean, it's very interesting also to know what Jordan was just saying, that now we are having an influx of these so-called sci-fi fantasy kind of themes coming out, and I think it's just a true telling of the time that you have a growth in this sphere of reality, because we are in that time where this is supposed to be unfolding, but but to remind yourself, and I mean, kids and anybody who is listening, who is kind of slightly curious about this stuff, is that you have been molded your whole life. If you were born on another planet where this is common knowledge, it wouldn't be anything strange about it. It would be that's just what it is, right? And we're in a place and a time where we're starting to bring our planet to that place. I truly believe that we had that at one point with older civilization, but for whatever purposes of the cycles, and clearly everything is in a process of cycles and an unfoldment of patterns. And this is just a time, and it's a beautiful time to be alive.
Yeah. Oh, we definitely agree. Definitely agree with that. I think that Jordan and I have talked a lot about the programming is important, though. I don't think that the programming that we get is disingenuous. Some of it is, but not from our parents, right? Because survival, right? Seeking survival is the same thing as seeking truth. Jordan and I have talked about this. We're going to do a podcast in the future on simulation theory. So we're not going to get too much into that now, but this programming that we get as children is important for our survival. But right now it's limited and it kind of stops. And it seems like what you're saying is, well, the media is kind of helping to fill that gap because of this influx in some of these movies that allow the imagination to kind of run wild. And some of them have science in them, or science fiction. And that really helps to paint a picture of this kid who, for me in the 90s or, early 2000s, there wasn't as much of that. It was more of just, for me, it was just like gangster rap. And, and that was the opposite of spirituality, really.
Well, once upon a time, it was less audio visual and more visual because they had comic books. If it wasn't direct imagery from something like a fictional comic book or something along those lines, it was us reading a book that was fictional. Because some of my favorite, and I don't read a lot of fiction, but some of my favorite fictional books, like Zanoni, it's a very old book. It's like 100 years old, maybe, maybe more. And then you have Brother of the Third Degree. So if any of you have not, if you're studying mysticism and you haven't read these books, these are books that have a single author that wrote potentially a single book or had other pseudonyms and wrote other books, but they only wrote this book under this pseudonym. So Zanoni and Brother of the Third Degree, we had stuff like that, but it was far and few between. And these were like stepping stones on the path for people seeking true and authentic spirituality mixed with science. And they would talk about multiple dimensions and worlds and celestial creatures. And then these individuals are obtaining immortality and interacting in the physical world.
Don't give the book away, Jordan. No, just kidding.
Well, yeah, so just go get the material. But the point is, so like now we're getting an influx of this material, and it can assist you in cultivating your spirituality. When I say spirituality, I mean both physics and metaphysics and science and math and, all of the sciences. But it can help expand your horizons, perspectively speaking. And it is a beautiful time. And like Vitaly said, these patterns that are unfolding from a prehistoric to a historic to early historic to modern historic sense, it's been advancing. But I would say that the masses have always been the masses. It is a pyramid scheme. So we're always going to have a massive amount of people until we don't, we're going to have a massive amount of people that are always going to be, subjected to the programming.
Yep. That's, the masses will be the masses. That should be a slogan for Earth. I could see that selling pretty well. Speaking about the masses being the masses and the initiates being the initiates, what do you think is the path to initiation, Vitaly?
The path to initiation is a process of unconditioning the condition. It is it is a process of the expansion of the lower mind and into higher spheres of consciousness. Now, you call them dimensions, you call them worlds, however you want to describe them. Initiation is the science of understanding what has brought us to this level of reality and what is necessary to be done to climb that same ladder that we descended through consciously.
Okay.
So if we have our way down unconsciously, now we have to climb consciously, which is part of the purpose of this entire creation.
So do you feel comfortable speaking about any of your experiences with initiation?
I could share some things. I mean, just generally, I
Sure.
won't go too in depth with it, but I had a series, and I have a series of experiences which have led me down this kind of rabbit hole of understanding and knowing. I have had multiple out-of-body experiences. I have had experiences with other beings on higher degrees. I have been taken out of my body, not by my choice. I have been put back into my body, not by my choice. For example, I find myself floating, seeing myself, and then almost like a kid, I want to go outside and play. And then all of a sudden something just comes and swoops me up and carries me back and dumps me back into my body like, no, you're not supposed to be out right now. It's past your bedtime. Right? And
Yeah.
The biggest one that I had, I mean, and there's, like I said, there's much to be shared, and I consider many of these experiences very sacred. So to even
Sure.
I would have to guard my words carefully as to what could be said and should be said. But,
Well, I think you shared enough, unless you want to keep going.
no, I mean, just if I could leave it at the fact that these other realities exist, and it's not to say that it is a different reality. It's a reality on top of this one. It's if you can think of the Russian nesting dolls, right, where you have a doll within a doll within a doll within a doll, and technically those dolls are infinite, but that is exactly what it is. They're octaves that exist on top of each other and within each other, right? And just like you have 7 notes in one octave, you'll have a higher octave made of those same notes, but in a higher frequency, right? And that is exactly how these worlds are structured. So,
yeah, it's hard when I've experienced similar things. I know Jordan has. We've talked about it. We understand kind of the sacredness of it, and I think part of that though is taboo. I think part of it isn't, right? Jordan and I have had this conversation a few times, and there's things that I keep back, and I know there's things he keeps back, but we do talk in generals, but that makes it hard to the scientific brain, and it makes it hard for the scientific community. And I get that because there's things that Jordan had been through that I haven't experienced, or, that I read about, and it's like, okay, well, if they're not the same, first, how do we know we're not delusional? Right. And, maybe we're all sharing delusion. And not that I think that, but from a scientific perspective, we have to take that into account.
Yes.
Because there are plenty of delusional people who experience majestic things every day. So
right.
Once we get past that, okay, we're not delusional, and we're of sound mind, and this is just something where it's part of the human experience, but it's not part of the human experience for the masses yet. It's just part of the human experience for individuals who are working their way through some sort of spiritual initiation. Well, then it's like, well, how come they're different? And not everything is. So then how do we go to what's common? We need to find commonality. And I think that's The problem with it being taboo, of people not talking about it, is it's hard to find commonality between these different experiences unless we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and really talk about some of these experiences that we've had, then that's how we as a community, at least how I see it, we can come together and start to flesh out what some of these other places might be. And I do believe that there are systems out there, and we're going to get into one of them, that has fleshed out. Well, we're not going to get into it too specifically, but they have fleshed out these different worlds in these different places, and they've used a lot of nomenclature and physicality and legality and process for this. And that's why I think it's so powerful, is because it's not just, oh, it's mine, it's special, I'm going to hold it with me and not share it with the world, and we're not going to get anywhere with that. Imagine if Newton would have said, calculus is mine, I love it, I'm not going to share it with the world. Where would we, Leibniz would have been in the back like, hey, I've got calculus.
Yeah.
But who knows if, but what do you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, so that's why the principles are so necessary, because whether you're having a hallucinatory experience, which could be the case, and it is the case, I'd say probably more often than not, because it requires a certain degree of refinement in the physics or of the biology of the human being. Like, as a mechanism, like we're becoming more mechanistically inclined to be optimizing this experience and our ability to perceive this experience in ratio to our capacity, and it's ever unfolding. And I would say that a lot of my experiences on the inner planes, as we would call them, normally happen before I come in contact with a manuscript or some scientific data or some type of ancient literature, because my left hemispheric approach to things, even though I'm right hemispherically inclined, my left hemispheric approach is always going to say, you could be tripping. Like you said, I could have been hallucinating. I was sober, but I was in a dream state, and, is it real? And that's why I think, like, the universe relates to each individual individually. And for me, I've normally, mostly, if not always, came in contact with the literature later after the experience. And I've had experiences that I've shared with Vitaly, and I've shared with you and some other people, where I've never read the literature, but somebody else might be acquainted with it, and they say, "Oh yeah, that's where this person, this famous person or master or yogi or whatever, they talked about this experience." Mm-hmm. I didn't have that literature available, so I can't use that as an excuse and say, "Oh well, I read that, it was in my subconscious mind, I hallucinated it." Even though someone might argue that reality, every perception of reality from every individual's perspective is a hallucination, because there's an interface, but we're going to get into that. But
yeah, that's semantics, though. I mean, argue that all you want, haters. We're not talking about the semantics here. We're talking about our realities, whether they're illusions or not. So you had I think, Vitaly, was there anything else you wanted to touch on that before we moved on?
Yeah.
Cool.
Before we carry on with the conversation, I just wanted to touch a few things. I agree with you 100%. Where will we be if everybody keeps it to themselves? And eventually there has to be some kind of hub of real scientific interest in these realities and systems, because we will come to a time where this is the accepted reality and the accepted perspective of the universe and what we are and where we are going. One thing to be careful of, and is why we have to guard these things and be very cautious of how we approach the dissemination of it, is because spirituality is very much anti-egoism. And so you have so many people who are out there with Instagram and TikTok and making videos, and some are very famous and have become great spiritual leaders. But they're coming from a place where some would term it as a spiritual ego, right? They're becoming these great beings, and they're not themselves exalting the greatness of the all, but they're exalting themselves as, yes, I've had these experiences. Come to me, I will be your teacher. And so, I mean, it's also very different. But at the same time, the greatest scientific minds who have become legends, it wasn't about them. Right? These people were genuinely interested and passionate about uncovering truth. And if we come to it from that approach, as in we ourselves as, humans having a human experience who may have had spiritual experiences, we are not the center of the universe, right? We have to place the center of the universe in its place, right? And we are, right?
Yeah.
So
that's a great point.
I think that's important. And also to be very conscious as to what Jordan was saying. How do you know it's not a hallucination? How do you know what's actually an experience in the higher worlds? And how do you know just a dream? That we need science to understand that. We have to understand principles, and we have to understand the power of the mind. What is the mind? And what is the difference between a intradimensional experience and an extra-dimensional experience, right? So what is happening within yourself as a mind, within your own egoism, in these adventures, if you so call it, when you go to sleep and you close your eyes, and the extra dimensional experiences where you're actually in the higher mind, outside of your little mind, right? You're actually connecting to the next degree, not so much those lower degrees within yourself. Right, because as above, so below, you have yourself a little universe within yourself.
Yeah.
So, but science to that, what causes somebody and what causes the majority of people to have those intradimensional experiences compared to those who have those extra dimensional experiences where they exit and go outside of their bodies and can go to these, different places and know that it's not something that has been happening within their own egoism, right? So.
Yeah, that's a great point. Another thing I want to say before we move on is anyone that's interested, look up Chris Timmerman, I think is his name, from the Imperial College of London. And he's been doing experiments with like DMT and I think other psychedelics where they've extended the amount of time that we can go into these interdimensional or extra dimensional places. And we can extract, they're learning about extracting information and making it a tangible and practical science. So like if these people are able to have the same vision and they don't know each other, and what's the probability of that? That we're all seeing these same entities and having these conversations and seeing these same color patterns and bringing tangible information back to the physical 3D universe as we see it. So the science is being done, and that's kind of like what me and Trent and you and people like us that we're so invested in is saying, okay, now we're in an age where we have technology. Technology is caught up with spirituality to some degree. Let's make it practical. And you have people like him that have been doing the research for many years. And, anybody out there, when you guys are supporting us, these are the type of things we want to do. We get funding. We want to go meet these people. We want to go have the experience. We want to collect the data. We want to be involved in the experimentation of consciousness in relationship to this three-dimensional world. This is a tangible science. So it's not just something we're just fabricating. It's real.
Yeah. I think they're trying to map out that dimension is what the little bit that I heard about it was that they were trying to map it out because they are scientists and because there's so many common experiences amongst people that they're like, okay, well, let's map this out. Let's take this chemical, let's see what happens, and let's map it out. And I think that's wonderful. I think that bringing that scientific approach to these things is much needed. I think the idea of the spiritual ego also is that went through my mind kind of as I was saying it. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, is that, yes, there is going to be that but we need to cross that bridge. We need to have that discernment, but people won't be fooled by these spiritualist egos if they had more information about spiritualism itself and these different processes. So I think the bar would just get raised and some of these frauds would just be exposed.
Well, that's the process, and that's what's happening regardless. That's exactly through all of these processes. Whether we realize it or not, there is a archetype that is being played out here, and it has its purpose. Everything is as it's supposed to be. I mean, whether we believe in free will or believe in chaos or randomness, and I know you guys have done a show about that, which we have clearly proven that there is no chaos, there is no random, right?
Yep. We've talked about, and we did the principle, cause, and effect. We didn't get too much into our own beliefs there, but we did talk about how we did talk about the idea of randomness. Yeah.
Right. And also to go back to, I'm not sure, Jordan, who were you were saying
Chris
about
Timmerman.
the Chris Timmerman. On the other side of that coin, you have Robert Monroe, who had
Monroe Institute.
The Monroe Institute, who has written multiple books, and I can attest to his techniques because I use them, and they are absolutely, real. And to anybody who actually tries to apply them, be careful and know what you're getting into, because Robert Monroe was a businessman who all of a sudden realized that he had a great talent for going out of his body consciously and exploring. And him being very left brain, he began writing down journals and he began testing his experiences. And if you haven't heard about him, go look him up, go get his book, Journeys Out of the Body, and take it in. You will be amazed because he has done a scientific work, and he has his entire school, which still exists today, which is called, like you said, the Monroe Institute, and they have multiple genres of systems and approaches to it. But he himself was a very talented escape artist, if you would so call it.
I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
And he has a great technique. Journeys Out of the Body, I believe it was chapter 17, where he goes into his technique of how to do it. He would call it the launching pad. And I mean, it's amazing material. The entire book, I would highly recommend it. I don't know if you guys have read it, but you should definitely go get yourself a copy and take that in.
Yeah, we'll put it in the link below. We'll make sure that we put that in the description because I haven't read that book, so I'll check that out. I've heard of the Monroe Institute before. You
would appreciate it, as the left brain of the connection. You would definitely appreciate it with his scientific approach as to what he did, especially the material that they wrote about. They created some kind of cage with electromagnetic fields that was not able to get out of.
The Faraday cage, I'm guessing.
Something like that, I believe it was called, yeah. Yeah,
that traps electromagnetic waves either in or out.
Right.
Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell in the 1800s the late 1800s, when they came up with their breakthrough of electromagnetic waves, created the Faraday cage, which is what our microwave is, right? That's why when we turn the microwave on, it's not like shield the kids, right? Because the microwave itself is a Faraday cage, and it keeps all those dangerous microwaves inside of the microwave and not frying the individual.
Consider the kind of more sinister uses of something like that. Right?
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think, you can. Everything in technology can be used for good or used for bad, and I could see how that could be used for bad, especially if astral traveling has something to do with the electromagnetic field, or if any part of traveling outside the body has something to do with the electromagnetic field. You could technically keep that individual inside of that body.
It's a whole new degree to espionage and all of that. And if you don't think the governments are playing with that, you should really reconsider.
I agree. Speaking of the electromagnetic fields, though, I think you wanted to talk a bit about the alpha constant and how it relates to matter and photons. Yeah, the atomic fine structure.
Well, I was hoping maybe the science guy could give us
Where's he at?
a little bit of a
call him real quick.
Quick rundown.
Yeah. Let's
what structure constant.
Yeah, let's give him a call. Nature, my one and only love, has a fine structure. Let me show you how. The fine structure constant is the strength between electromagnetic charged particles. The E represents the charge, epsilon naught represents the permittivity of space, Planck's reduced constant represents the quantum mechanical aspect, and the speed of light ties in special relativity. Its value is approximately 1 over 137. If the number was any smaller, the universe would be comprised of mostly heavy elements. Increase the number and we would only have hydrogen. What's intriguing about this constant is it's unitless, meaning it's the same regardless of man-made measurements. It quantifies the gap in the fine structure of the spectral lines. These spectral lines are emissions or absorptions of photons. Scientists cannot derive this constant from fundamental principles. Do you think we will ever know the meaning behind this constant? Let me know in the comments down below. Universal Theory out. Yeah, the science guy sure knows his stuff. He sure knows everything about everything. So respect that man. He's tired of being lonely. But let's talk a bit about the fine structure as well. It is to the individuals at home. It's a constant in a loose sense. It is a constant in the vacuum with a constant temperature, or with, it varies with temperature, but you could have a couple degrees Kelvin in which it still is approximately the same. And what's really great about this, kind of like pi, kind of like the exponent, is it's dimensionless. So it's a ratio. Whenever you see a fraction, it's not that because there aren't dimensions, that's cool. And that means that there's something to it, as in like kind of closer to the nature of reality, and other species could come up with the same number. They didn't necessarily have to be on Earth to come up with the same number, because we use feet or meters. Even on planet Earth, we can't decide if we're going to say feet or meters or whatever. So when it's dimensionless, it's really this ratio, right? And it's the ratio of how charge interact inside of a field. So that's powerful, that there's no dimensions to it. And it's got some traction from a lot of famous physicists, Wolfgang Pauli, Richard Feynman. There's one more and I can't think of it, but they've all got, I can't remember if it was Einstein. Do you remember off the top of your head? The other? Okay, it's all good. There's a few really famous physicists who have kind of gnawed at this number and tried to figure out where it came from. And it's really just how, right, like we said, how two charges are interacting with each other inside of space-time. So it's how an electron, they say particles, right? But really, it's really interesting, and in quantum electrodynamics is where an electron is interacting with the photon and what happens there. Yes, and I know that's what you want to know about, right?
That's key there, because, many of those physicists that you have named have kind of hung that number on the wall, and it's kind of has its place as a mysterious number. It has its decimal number. I can't recall off the top, but I know it's 1 over 137.
Sure. Yep. That is what it approximately. So this is where we need to be careful as well, because it technically it doesn't go right into 1 over 137, even in the permittivity of space, right? Epsilon naught for you academics out there. It's still not quite that. So when you see alpha, you'll see two squiggle lines next to it, which means approximate. There's not an equal sign. And that, to me, there's something to that as well, is that it's not it exactly. So we do want to know, from left brain talking here, where this comes from, because we don't derive it from first principles. We get it from essentially taking different variables and putting them together so that way the dimensions cancel out. And one is the speed of light, so we're bringing in special relativity. One is Planck's constant, so we're bringing in quantum mechanics, right? And the other ones is charges, so we're talking about charges from a classical sense. So we're kind of tying all those different disciplines together, and that's kind of why it's so intriguing to physicists as well, is because it's tying all these different things together. And where it really shows itself is in spectroscopy. So an atom, when we used to do spectroscopy, we would see lines, right? For hydrogen, or basically it's the light that's emitted, has a certain frequency. When it's emitted or absorbed, if you have an element, right, and light is absorbed or emitted, then spectroscopy kind of will categorize the wavelength of that light that's emitted. And what they saw as the technology got better and better was that what they thought was one line was actually two lines. It was an absorption and an emission line that were very close together. And they found out that those lines are separate because in like the s orbital, right, you have a spin up and a spin down electron. That means the intrinsic spin up and spin down, not its orbital momentum. But then when you take into account its orbital momentum, it's going to have a bit of a shift, because one is intrinsically up and one is intrinsically down. So they're different, right? They're in the same shell, but they're different. So they give two different lines, and those lines are off by that alpha, that approximately 1 over 137. So that's kind of some, and it shows up in other places as well, but that's kind of some of the science behind it.
And that's why it's interesting, because it seems to be the relation between the relations, as many would. I mean, if you're actually contemplating this number and how it's appearing in so many different places across so many different measurements, it seems to be something that is that runs through them all.
Here's where we have to be careful, though, is some places where it's mentioned, and most of the places where it's mentioned, has to do with the Bohr model of the hydrogen atom. So Niels Bohr, right, he came up with the hydrogen atom, the model for it, and it was more of electrons whizzing. It was more like the planets, right? It was
spin.
Yes. Yep. So, but we know now that model is incorrect. So the fact that it showed up on that model, and I'm not trying to discredit this number, but please just let me. We'll get into the good stuff. But I just want to make sure that, because I did quite a bit of research on this because I know you wanted to talk about it, and it took me a while to get to. I just kind of went straight to the papers and straight to some of the math, because all the videos I was watching, they weren't really explaining. They were just like, it shows up here and here and here and here. And if you don't know, right, if you didn't go to school and study physics, you wouldn't know that most people wouldn't know that the Bohr's model is even a thing, let alone that it was something that we used before we found out, a proper way to show the hydrogen atom. So when we look at these ways in which this number, either it's not necessarily 1 over 137, it's the number 137, right, that shows up multiple times, but it's showing up in this classical world. And then the further we get closer to the reality of what's happening on an atomic scale, the further we kind of get from seeing this number. So I don't think that this number needs to be this bridge between, spirituality and science. I think that it's kind of a thinner, right? That would be a thinner bridge. We want to find something that has more footing. I don't want to say that, hey, there isn't something to this, because the fact that it does show up even in these different models means that as man was learning, he was learning kind of through this number or in multiples of this number. And we see patterns. And who knows, if we can't say where it comes from in the scientific community. So we can't say that there isn't something to it. But what we can't, but
Right.
what the scientific community can say, and then I'll be done, is just that, hey, it's not, if you got, it's like almost winning the lottery, because it's not exactly. So if you put out your lottery ticket and somebody was like, you almost won, it was like, you wouldn't celebrate, right? You'd be like, I almost won. So because it's, it's approximately 137. So I think that the more we dig into spirituality and science, that there's going to be something to this dimensionality and something to these relationships, but I'm not sure if this number is necessarily it. And yeah, not sure if that's what you want to hear, but that's what I found.
I want to say something too, real quick, Vitaly. So another reason why we see the number, because everything is in fractal patterns because of the geometry of physics, and then how we view the geometry of physics based upon the methodology and the scientific inquiry through the mechanism that we have. So we've inquired about it, we've developed methods, and then we have perceptions. So, hypothetically, if I use a different number system, and we talked about this, then I'm going to see a different number. Now, I could be looking at the same problem and I could be getting the same answer, but it's going to be via whatever my methodology is. But if I'm using the same number, I could be from anywhere in the universe and come up with the same numbers. So that goes to show you that these patterns are fundamental to how we process these geometrical constructs that we come in contact with.
Yeah. The fact that there's all these base 10 is what Jordan's talking about. The fact that we use a log base 10 system in math.
And I think that's where this conversation can evolve to another, because current modern day science will look at the base 10 system and it's completely arbitrary to them.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's not.
Agreed.
And I mean, that can be a whole other discussion.
Well, touch on that.
But when we have it's very easy to see the numbers that we use and like this base 10 system and say to ourselves, yeah, it's completely arbitrary. The fact remains that this number has been seen and is seen in multiple different scenarios, and that is what is intriguing about it, because nobody knows why.
Agreed.
And that is something that we should say, listen, okay, when you're doing scientific experiments and you're doing and you're looking into data using the scientific method, if something keeps coming at you, it's kind of telling you like, okay, there's got to be there's something there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's something there. I mean, and as we evolve, I would agree that we have a better understanding of the atomic structure, but I don't think that would go to discredit anything that what's his name? Bohr. I don't think that would discredit what he has. It's really what we should be doing is marrying a lot of these truths that we have been uncovering.
Well,
go ahead. And to see that you have a cloud of probability now, right, which surrounds the center, and that's our understanding. I would say that's accurate, but there's mathematics is mathematics, right? Numbers are numbers. As anybody on any side of the universe would say, that, if you want to discuss something, you would use mathematics, right? They have a different language, but when you're speaking in mathematics, it's universal, right? This is something that crosses all borders. And so if we want to really understand these things, we got to stick to the numbers and know that the numbers are telling us something. And the first hurdle to jump across is that they're not arbitrary, right? The numbers are not arbitrary. The base 10 system is not arbitrary. And to tie it together with I believe what is our direction for the show is to say that how interesting is it that our modern day physics, how long ago was the fine structure constant discovered? Who discovered it? I forget his name again as well.
Bloomerfield or something like that?
Summerfield.
Summerfield.
Yeah, Summerfield.
When
It was like before. I think it was a little before that. I think it was like the 1920s, but sure.
1920. Okay, and we currently understand this number as something that relates the way that forces interact, especially the process of the electron and its or any particle or elementary particle that absorbs or emits photons, right? How interesting is it that the system of Kabbalah, which is thousands of years old, uses numbers? The entire system is built on numbers. It's a mathematical science itself. What most people seem to think of it as a mysticism, it's absolutely not. It's a complete science. And the word Kabbalah means reception. And every letter in the Hebrew language has a number. And if you take the name Kabbalah, which means reception, and you turn it into a value, its value is 137. And what is it? What is it teaching you to receive? It's teaching you to receive light.
Like the electron.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely something to that. All of quantum electrodynamics is that, right? Is learning about that.
So systems, thousands of years old, is now being confirmed by our modern day sciences, right?
Yeah.
I personally believe that Kabbalah has a greater understanding of this system because you have to apply all of these levels of reality, right? Kind of where we're stuck at, and it's the next hurdle to jump through is consciousness, right? We can't go past this block. You can't go past this wall until you learn, okay, the only tools that's going to get us through that is our consciousness. That is our base instrument.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree that there's something to that. There's something to the fact that, hey, a lot of people that study Kabbalah study physics. You know, they go off and they get their PhD in physics.
Newton was the Kabbalist.
Who is that?
And what Newton.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Newton was a Kabbalist. Einstein was a Kabbalist. These are things you don't hear so much, they don't talk about it. But the truth is, most of the greatest minds clearly delved into this because there is something very tangible there. And it is a science that pre-exists. And I think will eventually be the key that marries these two hemispheres, because that's literally what it is. That is what it's supposed to be. And I mean, it's not to say that, Judaism holds the key to everything. No, Kabbalah actually predates Judaism. And its after effect is Judaism and these other religions that came after it.
Yeah.
Right.
Could you elaborate on that? Like, I would like to get into, for the listeners, I would like for us to get into the system of Kabbalah, the initiatic system, and talk about how it relates to other cultures and religions and so forth. That way they can get a more refined understanding of what you're referring to.
Right. Kabbalah is a study of lifetimes, clearly. And the main thing to keep in mind is that when we say Kabbalah, most people will automatically turn to Judaism or Jewish mysticism and kind of secularize it in that sense. But that is not what it is. Again, it predates Judaism. The entire Hebrew language is based on Kabbalah, and it was created by Kabbalists before Judaism even existed. So to understand that is that you have a science hidden in the language itself. And again, so we don't secularize it. Buddhism is Kabbalah. Christianity is Kabbalah. The actual essence of any of these world religions and spiritual systems is Kabbalah, because what are you trying to do? You are trying to merge or have union or enter revelation or have an experience of what everybody wants to call God, the creator, the higher force, the higher self, the upper soul, whatever you want to call it. What we're trying to do is connect with that, and that is the string that ties all of these beads on the necklace together, right? Is what is it that we're actually talking about? All of the systems are describing the same thing, but they're talking about it from the language of that culture, right? So you have a system that has been extrapolated from nature itself, and it is being passed down by these sages who have entered it. And if you're really listening to what they're saying, they're telling you the same thing. There's laws. There's a law to the creation. And by understanding the laws of the creation and applying them to yourself, you are able to enter into higher realities of this system, which are here. They're here right now. It's not like it's a different world. It's something that's apart from this. Everything is integral. It's an integral system. But we are, just like there's multiple octaves in a piano, right? You have multiple octaves to this reality, and we have to understand why we're in this one, the laws that manage the system, and through applying these laws to yourself, you are able to expand and enter into the higher octaves and have experiences there.
So as far as it relates to the hermetic principles, do you see so Jordan, just real quick for context, Jordan and I kind of see the hermetic principles as permeating all of infinity, but a certain infinity, and then there's infinities outside of that where the principles might exist. Some of them might be backwards, they might be flipped. As far as the Kabbalah goes, for you, is it everywhere? Does it permeate everything, even infinities outside of all infinities, or is it just have its own, is it structured inside of a certain infinity and then the rules could change in a different infinity?
Right. I understand what you're saying. So
okay.
Kabbalah teaches that there is only one system. There's only one creation. And within the creation, you have multiple creations. Okay, but it's still within the sphere of one infinity in how you are terming it. So there's only one infinity with infinities within that infinity. And the actual laws permeate all of them. There's no other way that creation can be created, otherwise it collapses upon itself. So if there is a sustainable infinity or another world, which if that's how you want to word it, it has to follow this system. It has to follow these laws, because if something was changed, then life could not sustain itself, right? So there's basic fundamental principles that uphold the entire system.
You don't think that that's being dogmatic by only saying, hey, what this teaches is the fundamental fabric of everything? You don't think that's at all dogmatic? Like, oh, go ahead.
No, I think the principles pre-exist the creation. And the creation all of creation is upheld by these pillars, which are the principles. And as soon as you start removing principles, it ceases to function, right? So, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but I think it is another step above that perspective to realize that creation is creation. If you start baking a cake, you know what I mean, and you mess up one ingredient, it's not going to be a cake anymore. If the oven is not set to a certain temperature, it's not going to turn out how you wanted it to turn out, right? The worlds fundamentally will collapse on themselves if they're not upheld, and that is what happens with worlds. And this is what the depth of the Kabbalah will teach you, that there have been many worlds, and if they don't apply the principle, because we're talking about consciousness here, right? When we're talking about a world, it's not a static thing. It's a dynamic consciousness. And the fact that we are in this one and we are in this level of it means all of those higher worlds, and the higher worlds can't do anything but be those perfected worlds because of the way the cascading is taught. So I don't think it's dogmatic. I think it would be more awe-inspiring to realize that, okay, there are these laws and they permeate absolutely everything. These are the principles, right? The principles have to pre-exist time and the cascading of itself, right?
So I would like to say this, and then I'm going to pass it to Trent. So what he's referring to, and I would agree, but because we've had this discussion, is, he's saying, is that the only oven baking a cake in infinity? Because inside of that oven is infinite, and imagine this oven is infinite, and there's infinite cakes being baked, and all those infinite cakes, infinite inside of infinite, from the infinitely high to the infinitely low, from the infinite to the infinitesimal. You have all these infinite cakes being baked in this infinite oven, but then hypothetically, I would be limiting infinity to say that this is the only infinite oven. So imagine there's another infinite oven next to it, and then it goes inside of Ain. If anybody wants to know what Ain is, AIN, or what is it, EYN, look it up. And it says nothing, but it's not nothing. It's kind of like the container for all of something. So I would like to imagine that there are infinite versions of infinity, and our version of infinity, even though it is infinite and there are infinite infinities inside of this infinity, I would like to hypothesize and say that there's potentially other infinities outside of our infinity that may not have mentalism, that may not have polarity, that may not have vibration, that may not have rhythm and cause and effect and so forth. I don't know if I named them all, gender. So is it plausible to say that this is something that could exist, or are you saying that it is not dogmatic because there is only one oven?
So there's infinite ovens within the one oven, and it's like a tree, right? The tree, there's one tree, it bears its fruit, and that fruit has seeds in it, which carry the scheme of the original tree. Okay, and if you wanted to use the principle of correspondence to understand it, we have humanity. Let's take, for example, you have many different kinds of humans, right? You have big humans, small ones, fat ones, skinny ones, right? Black ones, white ones, yellow ones, red ones, but they're still human. There's still a base structure between all of them. And if we're going to use the principles, we have to apply them universally, right? Otherwise, you're not talking about an absolute. So if we see these principles in everywhere, even in our observable universe, right, it would be like saying, oh, well, maybe there's some galaxy out there that is not using this system. It's a fallacy in itself to think that way, because there could be the actual principles are there which govern your manifestation, right? How are you going to have? So we have different kinds of humans, but I mean, again, we're talking about humans. They have a face, they have a head, they have a body, they have two arms. Some of them come out with one arm, some of them come out with one leg, but these are mutations within it, and they suffer because of that for whatever purpose, right? You have people that go against the laws of the creation and they die early, right? They don't know the laws. They become corrected by the system. So there's a system. The system is the background. The system is the principles itself, right? And those principles are guiding everything. If you're looking at the fundamental shapes, even looking through the eye of physics, you have the torus field, right? You have electromagnetic radiation, which takes a certain shape, right? And that shape is governing every manifestation that we can see. So how are we going to, it's kind of a stretch to say, oh, well, maybe there's one where it doesn't. Is it possible? I mean, I would be limiting myself, but I think that universe would have crumbled as soon as it would have manifested itself, because it's the principles are perfection.
Yes,
right.
But the problem,
and they, the pillar uphold everything.
The problem with that is those universes would crumble if they were dependent upon the principles. So imagine that it's not inside of our universe. It's not in our multiverse. It's not in our infinity. No matter how many infinite versions there are, just hypothetically put yourself in a situation where you imagine that this oven that's infinite with infinite ovens inside of it also has infinite ovens beside it. hypothetically. And then this infinite oven, we could never imagine because we're going to use the principles to try to imagine it. So it's unimaginable aside from the fact that we can imagine that it potentially could exist. And then imagine that if I say that it doesn't exist, that I limit it. If I say that it does, I'm saying it without actually knowing because I'm only bound by the principles. So I can't actually say that it does or doesn't, but it's more probable that it does than it doesn't because I'm limiting it to being finite once I subscribe to a limit within that infinite, if that makes sense. Is that correct, Trent? Am I going around
No, yeah, that's right. I think that we've kind of broached a topic, though, that we're going to have to invite Vitaly back on. Otherwise, this podcast is going to go. I mean, I appreciate where it's going. And if you're sitting on the edge of your seats at home,
They're like,
then
eating their popcorn.
yeah, you're probably going to have to wait for a part 2 because I want to respect everybody's time. But yeah, that's kind of where it's going. I think to really think this entire kind of situation out, we're going to need probably close to the full hour. So we'll have to, Vitaly, we'll have to invite you back on in the future. So that way
part 2,
we can just kind of start with this. Everybody's gotten to know you. You know, we've gotten through the kind of ice-breaking questions, and then we can just kind of jump straight into some of these more Kabbalistic heavy interpretations and how we can play with them and how we understand them. But obviously, I'll give you some time right now if you want to say some things in closing or speak to what Jordan was saying. That's fine.
Well, I could leave it with one.
Sure.
One quick little seed here, seed of thought, where by applying this, when I speak of the true multiverse, the true containing oven, there's one of them. I mean, we're talking about all of the infinite existences within it. If we are under the impression that there is order and not chaos, then we cannot ascribe to that, right? Otherwise, there is no order. And it's just whatever. My mouth is on my foot and my eyes are on my back, you know? But what we see is that there's a clear order in the manifestation of all things, and we should really pay attention to that.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I know Jordan is dying to have this conversation. All right,
we'll say one more thing.
Everybody's going to want to have one last thing, though. That's where we're going to have to be gracious hosts. But okay, well,
so I would agree with Vitaly when it comes to hypothetically this one container and having infinite order. The only disagreement I'd have, and we'll save this for the next one, is what about the concept of the absence of order or something organized in a way that is impossible to predict because the order that we are ordered by only allows us to order things by way of those principles. So that's something that we'll save for next time. But I see exactly why he's saying what he's saying, because he's taking the Kabbalistic approach, which people think that mystics just they have an experience, they grab it, they write it down, and they pass it on through the ages. And that's not what the Kabbalists did.
No.
They only elaborated on their experience. So what he's doing is he's applying the Kabbalistic scientific method by saying, hey, if this thing does exist, we can't validate it.
Yeah. And Jordan and I can't say we're the first to kind of try to tie science and spirituality together because it happened in the past. It's split as philosophy became a thing and philosophy split into science and philosophy. But before that, it's happened. And we know that through these texts, like Vitaly was saying, it's not just mysticism. There's a lot of rigor that goes into that text. And we need to respect that. And we need to understand that it's time for it to happen again. That's where we're at in society. That's where we're at with science. Because of that split, science has made it so far. Now it's time to marry the two together again. So as you can see, what Jordan and I are doing is important. We're not saying we're the first to do it. We're just saying that we're at a turning point right now in time where this needs to happen again. And as you can tell by the guests we've had on, we hardly, we have conversations with them off of camera because we know them. But, what comes up on the camera, other than the questions, is very natural, right? None of it's forced. So we appreciate you, Vitaly, for coming on our show. We're definitely going to have a part 2 for all the listeners at home. Thank you very much. We love you. Have a good night. Peace.
Don't talk to me, it's off to me, assault police. The archer screeds, my carpentry is carpeting for all of these false MCs. I chalk the scene, I'm Charlie Sheen. I darken dreams, the carpet bleeds, my corporate leads. A scarring your whole face like a Carter scene. I go hard cause the car to me. You ain't hard as he, or the yard hate.